Let's quickly keep building our website, this time by improving the navigation and also completing the root layout. So right now, this is the navigation that we have. So just this simple list of unstyled links here. So there's no styling at all. And so let's now grab a new navigation from these components in these starter files. So this is going to be very similar, but with some stylings applied. So I'll just grab that and place that here in our components folder. So yes, let's replace that. And okay, here we need to now replace the ace again with link. But everything can stay the same because this link component from Next.js also uses the href prop. All right, then just importing that. So import link from next/link, and beautiful. So the text is a bit bigger, they are side by side, and everything works just like before. Now here in our layout, we have this header element, then the logo and navigation in there. But instead of doing that, there's actually a header component in the starter files. And so let's grab that as well. Place it right here. And so this then grabs the logo and navigation and adds all of these styles to the header. So let's here add that header element instead. So importing this one right here. And nice. So this is starting to come together. Now we have some nice styling, even here this very subtle border in the bottom. And so let's keep going here and actually finish the main layout. Now, first of all, we're not going to have any footer here. So let's get rid of that. And now we always want this content here to be in the center of the page. Let's make it a bit smaller here so we can actually see that better. All right. And then let's add some class names here. Let's give it a max width. So max W, and here we're going to select 7XL. So let's see how much that is. So that's 2080 pixels. Let's just give it a background color as well, so we can just see what's going on. So let's make this even a bit smaller. Otherwise, we cannot really see it. All right. And so now all we have to do is to center that here in the viewport. So for that, we use MX Auto. So basically giving it the same margin on the left and on the right. So setting them both to auto. All right. And now we just need some spacing here. And we also want to make sure that this part of the layout, so the part down here below, actually occupies the entire height of the viewport, which right now is not happening, as we can see. So this is our header and this is our main. So it's only like these 24 pixels high. But later on, we will have a background image here. And so let's actually create a parent element here, which wraps this main element. And so this is the one that will have the full height. So here we're just doing some basic CSS for creating layouts. And so the way we're going to do this is by making this body, so the whole body, a flex container, and then doing the flex direction set to columns. So then this is a column, and the div here, so this one here will become another column. And then here all we have to do is to give this the class name of flex1, which will make this here occupy all the remaining width. And so, well, where's that now? Let's try to reload. So, yeah, so you see now this occupies the height of the header, and this element here, this div, occupies the rest of the page. So in terms of vertical space. And now just to round this off, let's just give it some padding on the sides with px8 and also vertically. So that's py12. So again, we have here these nice values, which are some predefined values that just look good. Okay, and by adding them here to this outer div, so not to this one, but really here, ensures that this red container here still stays at exactly the same width, which is the same as the navigation. So this then looks all a bit better. And so here we can now clearly see the paddings. Okay, so this design works, first of all, because we're actually giving, so we're defining that the body should occupy the entire viewport area, so the entire viewport height. And then here with the flex and flex column, we're stacking these two flex elements, one on top of another. And then this one here occupies the entire space, which we could see again by giving it some background, say blue. And so there we go. All right. So this is a Next.js course, but we're still doing some CSS magic here. Let's get rid of this background. And that actually does it for this lecture. So this was all I wanted to do here. So doing some improvements to the styling. Let's just add here also an anti-aliased class to improve the font a little bit. But with that, we are finished here. So with this, we set the stage to actually do what I want to do next, which is to show you how we can also improve the performance of images. So that's another important topic in Next.js. And so let's tackle that next. So we already optimized fonts and some aspects of search engine optimization. But by far, the most important thing that always needs to be optimized in any website are images. And in fact, we can use Next.js to also optimize images. And so let's now learn how. So optimizing images is hugely important because images are always one of the biggest factors that contribute to page size. So usually they have huge impacts on loading speeds. And therefore, being able to optimize images with Next.js is a huge advantage of this framework. So to help us doing that, Next.js provides us with their own image component that we can use instead of the native image or img tag. So the first image that we're going to optimize here now is this logo. So let's start by importing that image component that I just mentioned. So that's just image, and then from next/image. And so now, as I just mentioned, we can simply swap out this image with the image component. Give it a save, and there we go. So in this situation, that's actually all we had to do. Now, what this image component does is three important things. First of all, it will automatically serve correctly sized images in modern formats, for example, WebP. And it will also only do this on demand, so only when it's actually necessary. Second, the image component prevents layout shifts because it forces us to specify the exact height and width. And finally, it also automatically lazy loads images only when they actually enter the viewport, which is another huge optimization which we get for free out of the box, and which would be a bit more complicated to implement ourselves manually. So let's just check out the image here just to see what I mentioned by that. So for example, here we now get this source set here instead of the source that we specified, which basically optimizes this for responsive design, serving images in multiple sizes. So here we get one with 128 by 128 pixels. Here maybe we get another one with another size. Well, not really. I mean, in this case, this is really a small image. So here the gain is not going to be so huge. But later in other images, this actually makes a lot of difference. We also see that some important other stuff has been added here, like the lazy loading, some decoding property, and so on. Now, I just talked earlier about preventing layout shifts, and so that's why the image component actually needs us to specify the dimensions of the image like this. So right here, basically in the JSX. If we just did this, then here we get this error. So it's missing the required width property. The same is also true for the height. All right. Now this is actually only one way of using the image component. So this image component has quite a large and actually kind of confusing API. So we can use it in many different ways with so many different options here. This is just the easiest way in which we can do it. But let's now explore another one, which is where we do not specify the source like this here, but instead we first actually import the image up here, and then we use that imported image. This way, Next.js will be able to analyze the image first, and then we do not need to specify the height and width. At least it is not going to be mandatory and will not cause an error. So this is the first way. Let's keep that here and just duplicate it. But now, as I just mentioned, let's import the image here. I'm just going to call that logo. And then here we can just do it as always. So now it's not at.app like we would use earlier, but it is in the public folder. Like this. Logo.png. Here, of course, we're missing the from. More like that. And so here, we can now replace that source with that logo that we just imported. Now, okay. So you see, this time we don't get an error as we don't have the height and the width. So this still works. But now, of course, the size is no longer correct. But you see that we still get all this stuff right here. So you cannot really see it with the hovering here. But actually, since we didn't specify the height and width, the image hasn't even been resized. So notice how the 163 pixels is actually really the size of the image. So if we open that here, well, it doesn't really say, I guess. But yeah, that's the actual size of the image. And so in this case, it hasn't been resized at all. And so let's actually copy that and paste that back here. And so now we are at the same size as before. And if we hover this, then here we get that 60 by 60. Okay, at least here, let's see what we have on this one. So here we have 128 by 128. Maybe we had the same here also. Actually, yeah. But you can explore this here on your own, just to see what really happens. Now with this, so when we import the logo like this, which we call a statically imported image, then we can add a few other properties like the quality, for example. So let's do that. So that's another prop we can specify. Let's say we just want 10%. So that will then probably look pretty bad. And yeah, maybe you noticed that. So now it looks all blurry. Let's put that at 1% here just for fun. And yeah, now it looks pretty bad. And if we then hover over the image, we can see that it's only 2 kilobyte, which is pretty good. But of course, we cannot sacrifice the quality so much. So for example, let's say we want 90%, then we get a better quality and of course also bigger size. Now this logo is already pretty small as it is. And so let's do 100%. I'm not sure what the default here is. Maybe that default is less than 100. So let's just keep that there at 100%. And now we are at 8.5 kilobyte. But in any case, you can see that this is pretty amazing, right? So we have now such an easy way of simply determining the quality of the image right here from our code without having to first upload it to some web application or to some tool on our computer, then run the image through that to optimize it or to resize it and doing all that stuff. That's always a lot of additional work. But in Next.js, we can do all of that automatically. So we get it all for free with this really nice image component. And again, there are some few different ways in which we can use this, and we will explore those as we go through the rest of the project. But for now, this is the easiest way of using this, and just this alone is already a huge gain. Let's keep going and now build our homepage. So let's open that one up. So again, that's the page.js in the root folder, so in the root app folder. And so right now, all we have is this h1 and this link right here. And so that's exactly what we see represented there. So as for pages, we have basically some starter code for all of them right here in this pages folder. So here, what we want is the home page. So I'm going to open that one up. And then what I'll do is to just copy the entire JSX here. So let's close that. And so we will replace all of this. And so we see that the h1 is the same. We still have this button here basically, but now it will be styled. All right. So we have this h1, again, the button, which is again not a link yet. So let's fix that. Yeah, it's still imported from earlier. And so now if we click that, yeah, beautiful. We go to the cabins page. Okay, now the big task that we have in building this homepage is to style or to really format this image right here, again, using the built-in image component that we learned about in the previous lecture. So actually, right away, Next.js warns us that we should not use this image tag here, but instead use the built-in image component. So again, to automatically optimize images. And here we can actually directly go to the documentation page here on Next.js if you want to check out more about this image component, which you definitely should. So image here, and then let's import that as well. Just duplicating that and then from image, but now we will get some errors because we didn't define the height and width property. However, we also do not want to do that. So we don't want to be required to specify the height and width because this should basically be a responsive image. So it should take up the entire width always of the screen and should then size accordingly. So if we don't want to specify those height and width, remember that instead of specifying the source like this, we need to statically import that image. So just like we did in the previous lecture with the logo. So import the bg from, and then here we go to public slash, let's see, it's called bg.png. Then let's replace that here with bg. And so then that should look a bit better. All right, still looks the same. And now here comes the magic to make this work. So instead of specifying a height and a width, we can also specify fill. So just fill without any value. And so then that looks like this. Nice. Right? So it basically fills up the entire element. Now let's bring this back here actually, just to see what happens when we make this smaller. So this is still not ideal, some stuff to fix, but it already looks pretty nice. All right. So what we need to fix is to use now CSS to make the object fit here to cover. So for that, again, we use, of course, Tailwind, and we use object cover. Well, not like this. Yeah. So as I said, if you don't use Tailwind, simply the property that you're going to need is this one. So object fit set to cover. And so now that looks a lot nicer. Now, if we were using just CSS, and if we didn't have this image component here, then probably we would use this image here as a background image in CSS. However, since we want to use this image component here, we cannot do that. And so we use this fill right here, and then to preserve the dimensions of the image, so the aspect ratio, we just make it object fit cover. So that's similar to the background image property of background size set to cover as well. But again, that's going into CSS territory, and that's not our main goal here. Now, what I want to show you is that the image, the original one, I think is like 7 megabytes or something. But now see how it's down to 45 kilobytes. So that's a huge, huge difference. Like, it's a world of difference for our users. Now, let's also adjust something else. So right now, as we move, so basically as the viewport gets bigger and smaller, the image kind of shifts around here. So we don't want that, and instead we always want it to start from the top. So we can use here object top, which translates to object position set to top. So then the image always stays at the same time, at the same place, except the viewport gets really big, but then it starts scaling there from the top. Nice. Let's keep going because we can actually do some more stuff. So we can do placeholder, and here we can specify blur. And this only works with images that are statically imported. And so now, as the image loads, we will see here this image blurred. So that's not really visible right now. Maybe it won't. So that happens very short. Maybe we can simulate this here with throttling. And yeah, so see how the image is basically blurred, and then at some point it loads and shows up in its original size and glory. Next, let's also specify the quality again. And since this is a background image, this doesn't need to be such high quality. So let's just give it 80, and that looks pretty much the same as before. Now here in the console we have a warning. And so that's because here we're using the fill attribute, basically, but we don't have any parent element with a valid position. So let's go back to our layout and fix that. So let's basically make the whole body here an absolutely positioned element, or a relative. Actually, that's better. Just position relative to the body. All right. Let's see if that disappears. Well, not really. Maybe we can just add that here. Yeah, but then the problem is that the image stays right here. So that's not what we want. And so that was the reason why we actually added it up there. So if we place that here, then it would basically be contained to all of this here below the navigation, which is again also not what we want. And it would also not fix that. So just leave that here, then it looks good. And this is just a warning anyway, so let's just leave it there. All right. Now if we make this bigger, like this, and if we reload again, then we should probably get a different image here. And yeah, so then you see the image is actually 3000 by 2000 pixel, where before it was just 1000 pixels. And so that's again Next.js optimizing the image on demand. So basically, as the page is loaded, Next.js will figure out what the image should look like and what size it should be. So this is the size, and yeah, the file size is still very, very small. So this is really amazing how much bandwidth this saves and how easy the whole thing is. All right, but now going back here, you can just reload. And so just to see again that now we are again at a much smaller image size, and also size in terms of kilobytes. All right, beautiful. So I think this is a really beautiful homepage here. In some situations, it's not so easy to read the welcome here, but never mind about that. So here we're just looking for a beautiful design. And so I think if you put this website on your portfolio, that will look quite stunning. So with this image here generated by Midjourney, by the way, so based on AI, you can do some pretty beautiful stuff. But anyway, that's it. Next up, let's build the cabins page and the about page. We're doing great progress in building our website. So let's keep it up. By now, start building the cabins overview page and also to build the about page with some more responsive images. All right, so we no longer need this one. So let's open up the cabins page. So this is basically the cabins overview page, which will display all the cabins, like one card for each cabin, and then the user will be able to click on that, which will then take the user to a single cabin page, which we're going to implement a bit later. So let's now, just like before, come to our starter page. So here, that is then cabins pages. So here, let's actually grab the entire function. We can close that and just replace this page here. Okay. Let's maybe reload that, and beautiful. So we have some nice text here, nicely styled heading. And you see that also we have, like for now, an empty array of cabins, which we should change, of course, in the future. So down here, we are then also going to render one cabin card, as I was just saying earlier, for each cabin. And let's also immediately add that as well. So this one right here, the cabin card. Let's add that to our components. So it also needs the image, but let's do that later, because right now we are not rendering anything here. Here, let's just import that. And there we go. Now, for some reason, the automatic import here doesn't use the alias. So let's do that manually. Or we could have just left it like that as well. So for now, this is going to be our cabins page. Okay. And now finally, the abouts page. So not sure why there is some error here. Nature. Well, that's not, or maybe it is. Maybe we should use like this symbol right here. Why not? So I hadn't seen that before. That didn't happen apparently when I first built this. But nice. Okay. Yeah, looks the same way. And so now let's grab the code for the about page, where we're going to spend a bit more time. Because here we have some images again. Oh, here we have lots of these. Let's replace all of them with that symbol. Maybe some more. Yes, there. All right. And now I will just grab again the entire page. And so in the about page, I'm going to replace this function. Does it have the export? Yes, it does. So let's give it a save. And nice. Let's make this a bit smaller, maybe just, yeah, so we can see a bit better what the layout is supposed to look like. So here we have, again, two images. And if we inspect these elements, we will see that they are, again, very huge. So you see 1.1 megabyte, and they are 2000 pixels wide, even though right now we don't need really that many pixels. And so let's again use the image component. So image. Of course, we need to import that properly. Image from next.image. All right, but here we are missing the width property. Now at this point, we can no longer see the page that we had here below, but what we want is to actually for those images to be also responsive. Maybe if we remove this, well, not really. Let's just go back here quickly, because then we can see that what we want is, for example, when this gets smaller, we want the image to scale accordingly. So that means that we don't have a fixed height and width here once again, but instead this image here should always occupy this column. So I believe here we are using like a grid or something. Yeah, so we're like each of these rows here is a grid. We can see that very easily. Yeah, so it's a grid, and this div right here occupies 2 columns of that grid. And so then the image occupies that entire width, no matter what the size of the column is. So that's some predefined style that is probably coming from Tailwind. Yeah, so that's this max width of 100%. So that's why that's happening. But now if we replace that image with the image from Next.js, then again, we need to specify that height and width, which we do not want. And so we're going to need to find a way around that, which is actually a pretty important part or a pretty important technique that we need to know when we want to use the image component, because this kind of thing happens all the time. And so let me show you how we can achieve that effect. So basically maintaining the effect we have right now, but while still using the Next.js image component. So first of all, we need to, again, statically import the image here. So that's going to be the first thing to do. So import, let's say image 1, because we have 2 of them, from, and then at public, and this one is called, it's actually called about 1.jpg, and let's duplicate this here for the next time. And so here we use just that. So image 1. And then here we are back. Now, actually, this already works now without us having to do anything else. So if we inspect this here again, then we see that behind the scenes, that image component, it still renders to a regular IMG, so this image HTML tag. And so then we still get that max width of 100%. And so actually this image is now still responsive without us having to do anything else. So see that? Now the thing is that this only works because we are able to statically import the image here. So what we did up here in the top. But that is actually not always possible, because sometimes we get an image URL from somewhere else, for example, from a database. So that's exactly what's going to happen actually with the cabin images. And so let's pretend that here we also cannot do that, so that here we also need to leave the source like this. And so in that case, we need to either set the dimensions, or we need to use the fill prop that we used in the previous lecture. So here let's leave it like this. So it works because, again, we imported this image statically, and so the Next.js is able to figure out the dimensions by itself. But if we do it like here, so just specifying the source like this, then that's not going to work. So let me show you that second version here, pretending that we cannot do this. So pretending that we got this image here, like from a database, for example. All right. So we're missing the width property, as I was just saying, but we don't want to specify it because it should be fluid. So a fluid responsive image. So instead we say fill. So let's see what happens then. And then it fills the entire viewport. So that's of course not what we want. And so now we need to apply that technique. So basically what we do is what we did also on the home page. So that image needs to be inside some container, and we then basically specify the size of that container and make the image here fit that container. So using again object fit set to cover. So let's do that. First, we need to specify here setting the parent to relative. So still loading apparently. Well, but in any case, this is only going to work if we set object cover, so object fit set to cover. So that's object cover in Tailwind. But then we also need to actually give this parent here a size. So right now, we cannot really see that. So here we see that it has a height of 0. So let's specify the size right here. But again, we don't want to specify actual sizes. So instead, let's do the aspect ratio here. So let's do aspect square, which will simply set the aspect ratio to 1. And so then here we go. So this is basically the technique. So we have an image that we don't want to give any dimensions. And so instead we place those dimensions here on the parent element. So placing that image inside a parent. And then we give this one here dimensions, in this case by using the aspect ratio, which is a very important and overlooked CSS property. And then we have this image here simply cover this div right here. And we could also use some other size here. So their aspect, I think video or something, it's probably 16 by 9. Yeah, so then the image gets that size. And it stays, of course, then still responsive, which was our whole goal in the beginning. But here our images are square. So let's leave this like that. Okay. Finally, let's also, again, specify the placeholder set to not blue, but blur. Yeah, but again, we cannot do that. Actually, I told you that in the previous lecture. We can only do this with statically imported images. So as I said, it's pretty confusing using this image component. But once you get the hang, so once you practice this a few times, it gets easier. So on this image here, we can still do that. And so here it will work. So here for a split second, you saw the blur. But if you're using this in production with a real web server, then this will probably show for a bit more time. And it's going to be really helpful. So instead of having just a blank or a blue background here, then the user can already see that something is there, and there is also no layout shift, which is a very important metric actually for Google. So for, again, search engine optimization. All right, then here let's also specify the quality, which again, we are not able to do this one because it hasn't been imported beforehand. Okay, but I still wanted to leave these two here. So this is the version that we can do to have a responsive image in case we can import it, which is the case for any image that we have on our computer like this. And here we're pretending that we cannot do that. And so here we have to use this technique again, where this here acts as a container, and then we have that container basically be covered with that image. All right. So very important technique. So keep this one in mind because we're going to need it again later. Let's now add a few nested routes and nested pages in order to now build the account section of our site. So remember how in the planning lecture we said that we were going to build here this guest area, which has this account URL part here, which in Next.js is called a segment. And so then we were going to add one sub route, basically. So an additional segment for the reservations. So like this, and then one for the profile. So remember that we basically built the URL structure like this based on our folder system. So right here in this file tree. So basically this first part here of the URL is this global app folder. Then in there we have /account, which is this folder right here. And so if we now want to add another slash, so this other route segment reservations, all we have to do is to create a nested folder in order to create that nested part of the URL, so a nested route. So let's do that. Create a new folder in here called reservations and one called profile. Okay, and now just like all other folders, these also need to get a page.js so that they actually become routable, so that we can move there. So now the folder already exists, but if we go to this URL, then you'll see that we get page not found. All right, so let's actually get these two pages here again from our starter files. So right here from the pages. So here we have the profile page. So we then have to just change the name of the file. So it always needs to be the convention of page.js, and then the same for the reservations. So here we have reservations. Yeah, this is the one. So let's place that in here. So this might seem like we're doing a lot of just copy pasting here, but really what these starter files contain is only some markup with some styling. So if you analyze this here, well, of course, there's also some JavaScript involved here, but we're not doing really the important Next.js parts. So we're not fetching any data or anything like that. So this is just really the static part, and there's no need to write that by hand. That would just take too much time. All right, so I really want to focus just on the Next.js part as much as I can. But anyway, here we now get this error that the reservation card doesn't exist. And so let's import, or let's place that component as well. So we don't have enough space. Yeah, this is the one. So add that right here. And now just fixing the import. So /app. Okay, what's that? So /app/ components, and that should fix it. Now we get another error. So this reservation card here, this needs the date fns package. So we need to install that. And then also it needs the delete reservation component. So now it's getting that from the starter files. So let's actually also place that here. Maybe we could just place all of them there. But well, let's just leave it like this. So all we have to do now is to install npm install date fns, which I believe we also used in the first part of this project. All right, and with this installed, we now can see our page. Nice. So let's close that, and let's just grab this h2 here and place that also in this page.js right here. So here, let's say, welcome Jonas, and this later can then be replaced by the actual username. So this page.js here, remember, is just this one. Right? And so this is simply /account. So this could be some kind of dashboard or some other information. And then if we go to /reservation again, that is then the nested route that we just set up. Of course, we need to spell it right. So that's reservations, like this. So then it says that we have no reservations yet, which is exactly the result, of this right here, which happens when we have no bookings. So again, we just start with this dummy data of an empty array. And then if we go to profile, we will get a form, or at least at some point we should. So again, we need to place some other component in there, which is this select country, and more about all these later, of course. So we're going to come back to many of these components a bit later. All right, so this is taking some time, but again, more about that later. All right, so we have our two nested routes and nested pages nicely set up. So it's pretty easy, again, using this file system-based routing. Now, if we just go here to the guest area, we have no easy way of accessing these two pages. So we probably should have some secondary, like nested navigation in this account area as well. So basically, for example, having a navigation here on the left side, which can take us to this home part here of the guest area, which is just this /account, and then also one link for the reservations and one for the profile. Okay, and so let's set up that nested layout in the next lecture. Let's now discover the power of nested layouts in Next.js by adding a site navigation to all our routes in the account area. So, as I explained by the end of the last lecture, what we want is basically a layout that stays on the page for all the three routes that have the account in it. So for /account, we want like a site navigation here. And we also want that navigation for account/reservations and account/profile. All right. So how could we do that? Well, let's think about it. When we wanted a layout that applied to every single route on the page, we added layout.js right here at the top level. So right in the app folder. And so basically this layout.js is at the same level as all or top level routes. So cabins, account, and about. And so therefore that layout then applies to all of these routes. So basically this layout.js that is right in the top folder is therefore called the root layout because it really does apply to our entire site. Now, if we want to add a nested layout to just one part of the site, so basically just below one URL, so basically just for one URL segment, which in this case is the account, all we have to do is to create another layout.js right inside that folder. So right here in account. So let's do that. Layout.js. And so this layout will then be applied to this page right here that is inside account, and just like always, also all the nested pages inside. So basically for these three pages, so /account and here account/reservations and account/profile. Now here, of course, we need to export something. So let's do that. Export default function, and let's just call it a layout. So let's just return a div here. And so again, we want a two-column layout with a navigation on the left side. And so let's set up a grid here. So we use grid, and then we use grid calls. And here we want to use our own sizes of the columns. We can do that with this syntax, 1fr. And again, occupying the full height of the viewport. And then let's a big gap as well. All right. And then in here, we want a navigation. So for now, let's just temporarily add that here. And then we're going to want the content as well. All right. And so immediately we see that our layout is working. And if we go to some other page, like this one, then of course that layout is nowhere to be seen. Again, because it is just inside the account folder. So it only works on /account. Now the thing is that we don't have any content here again. So if we go now, for example, to profile, then we won't see anything there. Only this exact same layout. So do you remember how we actually get in the content of the page itself now into the layout? Well, that's right. We use React's children prop. And so here, instead of that content, we use that children prop. So if we save this now, then here we go. Beautiful. If we just go here, then we have that welcome Jonas. And yeah, just going to add some additional style here, adding some padding to the top. And with this, our layout is almost done. All we have to do now is to add the actual navigation here. And actually, we already have that, once again, in our starter components. So that's the site navigation, and that navigation also contains the sign-in button. So let's grab these two and place them right here. Imports, no. Let's say no in this case. Let's close this one as well. So let's check out our navigation, or actually the site navigation. So this one is pretty interesting because here I didn't manually create a list of links like we have here, but instead I created this array of objects where each object is going to become one navigation item. And so this is a pretty common technique for dynamically generating a navigation. So here then we have the icon as well, which is coming from this hero icons package that we installed at the beginning. So here basically we get the name, then the href, and again the icon. And so then all that happens here in this nav, in this UL, is that it loops over that array. It will then add all of these anchor elements, which just like before, we also need to convert to an actual link. And then down here we have the sign out button, but more about that later when we talk about authentication. So now here first we need to import that link from next/link. Let's see if we have to change anything in the sign in button. Now here everything is fine. And yeah, this is good to go. So that this navigation will work right away. And therefore all we have to do here is to just import that. Just like that. Here I like to use the alias everywhere, like this. And here we forgot to close that. All right. Looks like there's some styling issue going on here. But of course, the problem is that we don't want navigation, but site navigation. All right, so what's the problem now? Oh, I actually placed a sign in button there and not the sign out button. So let's see that. This one doesn't need anything. And so here we go. There is our navigation. Well, actually, I thought this was going to occupy the entire height here, which it should. So let's just see what's going on there. So here everything looks great. So we're occupying the full height. So let's go actually to our main layout again. And so here I'm noticing that I actually did something different in the original. So in the original, we can make this here a grid container, because this will then automatically make it so that this div right here will always occupy the entire remaining vertical space. So if we save this now like this, then you see immediately that now this element, this container right here, so the whole thing, this div right here, this now occupies the entire height, no matter what that height is, right? But now then the entire thing here shrunk, and so let's just add here a width of full, so 100% width. And there we go. So that looks a lot nicer like this. Now, one thing that I was also noticing before is that when we go to this page right here and this one, then we still get the default title here with the welcome. So basically this one right here. And so that's because we didn't export any metadata from these two pages yet. So let's do that quickly here. So export const metadata and then the title. Here let's say update profile. Let's just copy and paste that. Yep, there that changes. And the same thing for the, well, that's not what we wanted. And then here, the reservations. Well, need to reload. And there we go. So this is how we create a nested layout. Let's just check that out again. And it's actually this one. And yeah, it's pretty easy to create as many nested layouts as we want using the layout.js convention by Next.js. The most important thing that we need to keep in mind is that we receive the children, basically that's on the same level here in our file structure. And so in that case, that's this page.js and also all nested page.js's. So all this content will become the children of this layout. And so then we can place that wherever we want in our JSX markup here. And if you ever run into any trouble when you build your own nested layouts in the future, in your own applications, then I found that it's a good idea to just experiment around with the location of the layout.js file in your file tree. So sometimes it can be a bit tricky to figure out, especially if you are really deep, like 3-4 levels deep in your URL structures, and also here in your folder structure. So then, again, can become a bit tricky to figure out where exactly the nested layout should be. But so just some experimentation will help you then. All right, and so this is actually the end of this section where we set up our website so that we can now actually start some more real Next.js development. So here in this section, we just build out the website, like all the routes, all the pages, and learned how we create basically the layouts of different pages as well. But now it's time to really start working with data, which is what building web applications and websites is really all about in the end. So I promise in the next section, there's going to be a lot more coding involved than we had in this section. All right, so take a break and then I see you there as soon as possible, hopefully.